reconciliation calls to action and treaty recognition and rights, celebrating and protecting water on Turtle Island in this incredible region at the heart of the Upper Great Lakes is all of our responsibility. Whereas since 1992, the United Nations has designated March 22nd as World Water Day to focus on the importance of water and raise awareness to inspire action about the global water crisis. Whereas the theme of World Water Day 2022 is groundwater, making the invisible visible, which is aligned with the United Nations Decade for Action, with the water goal as a top strategic priority. Almost all of the liquid fresh water in the world is groundwater, supporting drinking water supplies, sanitation systems, farming, industry, ecosystems, and will play a critical role in adapting to climate change. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie is uniquely located at the nexus of Lake Superior and Lake Huron, connected by the St. Mary's River and international waterways. The Great Lakes comprise nearly 20% of the world's fresh water, and only 0.3% is accessible to all humankind. This aligns with the city's efforts to attract the Canada Water Agency to Sault Ste. Marie. Whereas World Water Day provides an opportunity to make a difference in our community, Sault Ste. Marie invites all residents and business to participate in the 2022 World Water Day event as we raise awareness of water in our region to learn deeply together as a community about waterways and how we can protect and restore this amazing source of fresh water all around us. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie wishes to acknowledge and respect the importance of protecting this fresh water for today and for generations to come. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim March 22nd, 2021 as World Water Day here in Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you.
Under agenda item 5.2, Purple Day.
So before I read this proclamation, I want to just acknowledge Owen Hillstrom. Owen reached out to me actually last year around this time and to talk about this proclamation and to suggest maybe we could do something together this year. So I worked with Owen on this, and I want to recognize Owen and thank him for his efforts. Whereas March 26th is Purple Day, and people are encouraged to wear purple to raise awareness of epilepsy, a neurological disorder that causes unpredictable seizures and other health problems. And whereas 1 in 100 Canadians are affected by epilepsy and 65 million people worldwide are living with epilepsy. And whereas for approximately half of the people who are diagnosed with epilepsy, there is no identifiable cause. And whereas while seizures can affect any part of the body, 3 of 10 people will have a change in the structure of their brains. Whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie supports organizations and individuals committed to raising awareness to increase understanding, reduce stigma, and improve the quality of life for people with epilepsy throughout the country and globally. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim March 26, 2022 as Purple Day for Epilepsy Awareness in the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you.
That will bring us to consent. And I had a request from Councillor Shoemaker to pull item 6.3, Banking Services Agreement Extension.
Okay, so we're going to pull 6.3. Anything else, Councillor Nero? Okay, you have matters in consent. I'll come to you first, but I'm actually going to mention one before we get going. 6.16 is the Cenotaph, and there's an application on for a grant. And I just want to recognize and thank Reverend Phil Miller, Lieutenant Colonel Clyde Healy, Pierre Breckenridge, and Helen Stewart. I've been working with them on this project, and we should really recognize Virginia McLeod of the city, who came on board and helped us along on this past Remembrance Day. We all looked up at the Cenotaph and said, we really have to do something to really put that in the condition it should be in. So we're working on that now. The application that you see in front of you is a result of the work and our collective work and efforts. And I just want to thank them for doing that work. And I want to thank Virginia really for doing the good work she's doing and helping them find the path so we could restore that monument to the condition that it should be in. So that just an expression of gratitude. And obviously I think it's a very worthwhile project, and I expect it will get council support. Did anybody else want to speak to 6.16? Okay, Councilor Nero, I'll start with you then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 6.17. Listings. Just a question for Ms. McLeod on that one. Are the letters that we received that object to their listing? So are they all going to be, are we going to reach out to them? And my understanding from the report is that we're going to talk to them again to see if they we could list them? Is that the intent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero. Yes, that was the committee's plan. The working group was going to reconvene to have a bit of a discussion on the approach. And then from there, reach out to each of the individual property owners just to talk to them more about the process of listing, get a better understanding of their concerns and continue those conversations.
So to this point, the conversation about what it really means to be listed has not been had with these people?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we have had, so we did conduct public open house sessions. And some of those property owners did reach out to us to have further discussions, just so they could get a better understanding. And they still had reservations with regards to the process, but we'd like to take one more attempt to have further conversations with those property owners.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have on that one.
Anybody else in 617? Councillor Shoemaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. McLeod. Ms. McLeod, there's a petition circulating online about including these various properties that have been exempted from this list on the Heritage Register, essentially against the will of the property owners. I think you touched on it there in your response, but can you confirm our hope and intention is that these properties which are exempted from the register will at some point be added on?
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yeah, we do want to continue to work with the property owners. The past practice has been to try to work with the property owners as opposed to force them into either a designation or into being registered. So we want to continue those conversations, and down the road, hopefully we'll be adding those properties on in the future at some point, and as well as some of the other properties that the committee did look at for potential addition to a heritage register.
Okay, thank you. Do we know, is One Herrick Street, which is one of the properties owned here, is that owned by the DSAB? I know the neighboring property is.
Through you to, sorry, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker's, that's currently owned by the Catholic Diocese.
Thank you.
Anybody else in 617? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agenda item 6.21, the Court Security and Prisoner Transportation Program Agreement.
Okay,
Question for Ms. Fields.
go ahead.
Ms. Fields, through you, Mr. Mayor, the report talks about an agreement for funding to assist offsetting the costs for security and prisoner transport. The amount in the report for 2022 is $805,876. What share of the total cost does that represent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, are you asking what share do we have from the province, or how
Well-
much does that, what representation is that from what we pay?
I believe the share from the province is 805,000. Does that cover the total cost? What is the total cost, I guess?
No, it doesn't. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, it doesn't cover the total cost. In 2021, the court security costs were 1.217 million. 1.215 million are salaries and benefits, and 2,000 for the transportation costs.
Okay, that clarifies that. Thank you, Ms. Fields.
You're
That's
welcome.
all I have on that one, Mr. Mayor.
On that one, Councillor Bruni.
Question to Ms. Fields regarding this one. In 2019, the police services received 585,000. 2020, they received 624. And in 2021, they received 699. Now, 2022, we received about $100,000 more for 805. You mentioned that our cost was 1.217 million, and the majority of it, 99%, is for salaries and benefits. So when I spoke to you, you said police services absorbs the rest of the cost, which is approximately $400,000.
It would be, for 2022, it would be the difference between what they spend. So 2022, it'll be a different number. 1.217 is what they spent in 2021. So it's a difference between what they got in 2021, which was 699,000, and the 1.217. Cities, police services would absorb that, the
Right.
difference.
So my question is, should the police board be contacting the provincial government regarding this for the shortfall?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, the program has a maximum of $125 million in the program, and that is to assist all the municipalities in Ontario. So what they look at is they look at what percentage you use compared to the other municipalities, and they give you your percentage. So I don't think it would matter since they have a formula they already are using.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody on else on 6.21? Seeing none, Councillor Nero, do you have anything else on consent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have two more. 6.23. The sale of 328 Queen Street East. Question for Ms. Borwick, Seminar. In the report, Ms. Borwick, Semenik, speaks to regards to the two conditions and any default to these conditions where the city may take back the subject property. Are there any liabilities that would be inherited by the city if this property were to be taken back? Let's say work starts on the property and it's defaulted because of the two conditions. We take the property back. Is there any responsibility for the work that had been done on that building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, the agreement of purchase and sale that has been drafted has worded the conditions so that the city can choose to take back the property. So we've left it open in its sole discretion to be able to do so. So if in the event that the city needed to exercise potentially that option, we would evaluate the circumstances at that time that would present and bring forward a recommendation to council, advantages and disadvantages of either exercising the option or not at the time. And that would include an assessment of any liability obligations that might exist at the time of taking back the property if the council needed to go in that direction.
So just to be clear, if the purchaser ends up spending X amount of dollars in the next year and then defaults, we could be responsible for that X amount of dollars in taking the property back?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, we would not be responsible for any of the purchaser's cost in repairing or advancing the property. It would be a take back at that time, and then we would be responsible for dealing with the property, either perhaps a demolition or a restoration, whatever the circumstances of the property that exist at that time, but not the investment into the property to that date. We would not be required to return that.
Okay, thank you. And one further question, Mr. Mayor, through you. The two conditions are in the report, but when I looked at the bylaw, they're not mentioned in the bylaw, and neither are they mentioned in Schedule A of the bylaw. So where would these conditions be that we could fall back on if it comes to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, they are contained in the agreement of purchase and sale. Prior to this council meeting, an agreement of purchase and sale had been prepared and drafted on the basis of the recommendations before council. There's a condition in that agreement of purchase and sale that council must review the recommendations and approve a bylaw based on those conditions. So the agreement of purchase and sale itself does contain the conditions that are in the report. We don't typically put the conditions itself in the bylaw. It would be in the agreement of purchase and sale. So I can advise council that it is contained in the same wording that I have in my report.
Okay, good, great. That's all I have on that, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Anybody else on 6.23? Councillor Bruni and then Councillor Lisa, Councillor Bezalel. And then I don't see anybody virtually there. Okay, Councillor Bruni, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question regarding the the term of 2.5 years from the closing date that I guess the building has to be retrofitted. So my question is, how did you come up with 2.5 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we had negotiations. We tossed a variety of scenarios out there, and it seemed more favorable to divide it between a facade on an exterior and an interior facade, an actual interior approach. And to have it 2.5 years, the closing date that we have in the agreement of purchase and sale is April 27th. So that would be the target date from there. And just to enable the purchaser to be able to effect the necessary repairs, there is a lot that he expects to complete there, and he didn't want to be shy on time. So that provided sufficient time to enable him to be able to do so. He is, relating back to the first question, he advised that there would be a risk in purchasing and potentially having to return the property after making an investment in there. So he wanted to enable sufficient time to be able to effect the repairs that he wished to do so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezo-Allen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Borowitz-Sebenik. The facade is to be completed 6 months after the closing date. Do we have a potential closing date at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, yes, the closing date that we have in the agreement that has been signed by Mr. Muto's company is April 27th. So we would be looking at 6 months from that date.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm assuming that there would be some site plan control with the facade design?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo-Allen, Mr. Muto has advised that he's already reached out to obtain drawings and has brought that process in motion already.
Okay, thank you very much. Nothing further.
Okay, anybody else in 6.23? So you have one more, Councillor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I don't. It was on another item. That's
Okay.
it for consent. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Gardy, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Shoemaker.
6.13, Mr. Mayor. The Economic Development Fund application for Darius Films.
Okay,
I just wanted to comment that for me, and I think for everybody, it's probably a no-brainer. A $10,000 investment for more than $1 million return. And through this, we see the kind of money that film production can bring into the community. This type of opportunity is vitally important after the couple of years we've had. And whatever we as a community can do to support the development of films and film jobs in Sault Ste. Marie, we should. I commend Sioux College for their efforts in this regard. So this is a bit of good news for the Sioux, in my opinion. Thanks.
Councillor Christian, you wanted to speak on that one too?
I'm in full support of this as well, although when I read this, it just struck me as a little odd. So I have a couple of questions, if I might, through you to Mr. Anderson. In this request for the money, is this company making the same requests to North Bay and Sudbury, or is this specifically to Sault Ste. Marie?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian. The request is specific to Sault Ste. Marie. They are, enamored by the location. I think they see a lot of benefits here, but definitely with the increase in fuel costs and the increase in need for crew from out of town, they were looking for a bit of an incentive to tip the scales and to bring the film to Sault Ste. Marie.
I think it said somewhere in here that one of the reasons is that we don't have a full film crew or production crew. Can you speak at all about the status of same in North Bay and Sudbury? Are these communities farther along or better equipped in terms of that type of item than Sault Ste. Marie? Trying to get a sense of where we stand in with regard to our competitors.
Certainly. Both North Bay and Sudbury have had a well-established film industry for some time. They certainly benefit from their proximity to Toronto and having, I think one of the major aspects for both locations is they were able to land TV series, which allowed for, regular employment in the film industry. And as a result, they were able to not only retain their film crews that they had locally and even attract those from outside of their communities, but it also allowed them to attract supporting industries, so equipment rentals, sound studios, production studios, etc. So that's certainly why when films are assessing the north, they may choose those two jurisdictions over Sault Ste. Marie.
Okay, so that clearly explains. So as far as our infrastructure goes relative to Sudbury and North Bay, we're a bit behind here.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's it for me.
Counselor, I have Counselor Scott, so I just want to recognize I got you saw your hand though, so we'll go to Counselor Scott and then Counselor Vesuel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Councillor Christian answered or asked all my questions, but similar to similar to Councillor Gardy, I do think the support of this is paramount, because especially as the film industry starts to ramp back up with hopefully the end of the pandemic, it's important to really get our name out there. So this definitely has my support. I was happy that Mr. Anderson got those answers out, because I was curious about that as well. So thank you for Councillor Christian asking my questions.
Counselor Vesuel.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Anderson. In the application under 4.1.1, Travis, can you just give us a overview of the spin-off of job retention with the existing Sault Ste. Marie businesses? So, I do support this as well for the $10,000, but can you give us an example of what some of those spin-off job creation is in terms of the film industry coming to the Soo?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Vesna-Allen. Yeah, there's a number of, I'll just back up here. So we have about 110 individuals from Sault Ste. Marie that are trained in the film industry. Those individuals, could be anywhere, anything from location scouts to equipment operators to sound professionals. Now, unfortunately, due to kind of the on-off again schedule of filming in Sault Ste. Marie, those individuals often relocate or work on a temporary basis outside of Sault Ste. Marie. So the positions that the the EDF application and in particular Darius Films has indicated would be either retaining those positions in Sault Ste. Marie or potentially having locals come back to the Soo to work. And our hope in terms of the efforts that we're doing on the with the film and television coordinator is to attract sufficient films here to make those not only temporary jobs, but ideally long-term permanent positions in the Soo. And hopefully I've answered that question correctly, but if not, feel free to ask me to clarify.
I think also just the economic impact of other businesses that support the film industry. I think that's an important factor as well.
Certainly. Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that in the sense that, there is substantial benefits to the hotel sector. Going back to my earlier comments to Councillor Christian, we don't necessarily have all the production crews locally here. So we are bringing employees from outside of the city. They are staying at local hotels. Nearly all of them will eat out at our local restaurants on a regular basis. So we're injecting money, back into the industry, some of the industries that were hardest hit by COVID. In addition to that, there's obviously money spent at retailers, car rental agencies, renting office space, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of spin-off economic benefits from films locally.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, anybody else in 613? Okay, is that it for you, Councillor Gardy? Do you have anything else?
I got a couple more things.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Okay, I'm just trying to highlight some good things going on in the Soo. That's a part of our agenda. 614, the Tourism Development Fund application, Soo Nordic Ski Club. I've got a quick comment and then a quick question. I just think this is another great opportunity for this year and possibly next year is pulling off a successful event. This year leaves us well positioned, as the report mentioned, to host for 2023. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Anderson, could you just kind of remind everybody how this opportunity came about? Travis, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. in essence, what brought this event or great opportunity to the Sioux was kind of at the last minute. The event was intended to be hosted in Timmins, and there were some logistical issues there that prevented them from hosting. So the Sioux Finnish Nordic Ski Club and their large group of fantastic volunteers were able to jump on this event kind of as soon as they found out that it had fallen through. In my opinion, put on a world-class effort to host a provincial level event on very short notice. So it was really great to see the number of individuals that came to the table that helped out on this event. And from our side of things, we benefited by further reinforcing the quality of trail systems that we have here, our ability to host really great events. And on the economic standpoint, we had 133 participants under the age of 14, which meant that family was here and sometimes friends were here to support them. So it was a great economic impact to our local hotel industry and food and beverage industry, during the winter months when we're hard hit.
Thanks, Mr. Anderson.
Anybody else in 6.14? Your next matter, Councilor Gardy?
626, just glad to see that the,
Oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Do I have one of the virtual councilors here that wanted to comment on 6.14, Councilor Hilsinger? Sorry, I looked, but I didn't see your hand.
That's all right. I understand it's challenging. I just wanted to thank the and share my thanks to the Sioux Finnish Nordic Ski Club for, these events, they're extraordinary amounts of work, and for them to do what they did and to take on that challenge and to showcase our community. And from what I understand, it was a fantastic event. They deserve a round of applause, and thank you very much. And hopefully we can, Travis and his team can continue to work with organizations like theirs to attract these great events to Sault Ste. Marie. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Hilsinger. Councilor Gardy, your next matter?
626, the Active Transportation Fund. I'm just glad to see that the federal government is providing this funding and that staff is pursuing it. I'm even more pleased to see that nearly $700,000 would be invested in this type of infrastructure for the west end of the community. I'm hopeful we will be successful in the application and build on our existing complement of active transportation paths and lanes here in the Sioux. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No questions.
Okay, I'm going to go Councilor Shoemaker, then Councilor Bruni, and then anybody who is Councilor Christian, anybody who's virtual here on that, and Councilor Hilsinger. Okay, let's do it. This Councilor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to whoever authored this report. I think it's somebody from planning anyways. Mr. McConnell is, or Mr. Turco, thank you. Are these projects at the costs that you've enumerated in the report? Will these be ready to build at that cost, or is that for planning of the routes and engineering and all that work?
Through you, Ms. Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker, the work does involve, or the costs do involve design work. So there is a design exercise that would be involved prior to construction, but the costs that we do outline do indicate a total project cost. These are preliminary cost estimates because we haven't done the detailed design, but the overall cost does include both construction and detailed design.
That's great. I like Councilor Gardy, am happy to see that that there's funding available here. It was the purpose of bringing the motion to declare the James Street neighborhood connection as the top infrastructure priority from an active transportation standpoint, because we wanted to be ready when the funding did become available. Now it is available, and I'm happy to see it's top of the list here. So thank you for that, Mr. Turco. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to touch on Councilor Shoemaker's comments, if we're not successful in receiving this grant money, what's the next step for city staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, the next step would be to either await further funding announcements from other levels of government or other agencies that fund trail development, or to report back to council in future years to determine if whether we can construct some of these trails as part of our capital works budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councilor Christian.
This one, 620 for me.
Thank you. Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to, I have lots of comments today. This is a really great example of how a group of community volunteers under the umbrella of STAC, Sioux Trail Advocacy Committee, that came together over 20 years ago now and continually worked on a plan to improve our trail system, along with people like Steve and Don McConnell and Don Elliott and other city staff. And we had a plan that's ready, and now we have something that we can ask for. And as others have mentioned, it's connecting parts of our community that aren't as well connected as they should be. So I hope we're successful in getting this funding so that we can see more of our infrastructure improve. It's super. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else in 6.26? I think that's the end of your matters, Councillor Gardy. Well, you said a couple. So
Well, now I
we're on
got,
that. Yeah,
now I
yeah.
have one
So-
more.
So you're using inaccurate language.
Yes,
So
a
this is your
few.
last one. This is your last one.
This will be my last
It
one.
will be.
Yeah, so just 627, I think it's Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Economic Development funding for the plaza. I've been critical of the province in the past, so I think it's only fair that I commend them when they invest in our community. And I was glad to see that this investment came forward. I think it makes a lot of sense that this ministry is supporting it, considering that the mill market will be a key component of the plaza location, which will provide great space for our local area growers, producers to continue to sell their products. So thanks to the province.
Anybody else in 6.27? Checking with a virtual group. No. Okay. Any matters on the consent agenda? Councillor Gardy's done. Any other matters, council? Councillor Hilsinger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To whomever, with regards to 6.11, there's some great information here about the voter engagement communication plan and how we intend to reach out and do our best to get folks out and casting their vote on October 24th. My question is, are there now, or will you be developing specific goals to attack the areas that we can see that we want to see growth in, or more reaching out, more voters from certain demographics? Are we targeting something in particular to help us be the most successful we can be with this plan?
Maybe I'll go first and then I'll pass it over to Tessa, but through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. Certainly Tessa and I both spoke a little bit earlier today just on that point. And we are going to look at turnout numbers after the election and look more closely at those areas that we've identified as being underrepresented to ensure that maybe we've hit those targets and hit those goals. Have we set a percentage on voter turnout? No, not at this point in time, but certainly it was a discussion we had to make sure, hey, how are we going to measure the success of this campaign? And I'll let Tessa expand on that if that's okay.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. Absolutely, just to go along with what Madison was saying, the goal particularly for this campaign is to increase voter engagement and engage with groups that have traditionally faced those barriers and trying to reduce those barriers to get them to vote. So there will be more specific goals as we proceed along the timeline of the election itself, but definitely increasing voter awareness, engaging with those groups, and reducing those barriers are the key factors for 2022. And you'll notice there are some interesting ways that we plan on doing that. Specifically, we have a lot of digital advertising that we've allotted some funds to, as well print advertising. So traditionally, we haven't reached out to people through posters and postcards and billboards and transit advertising. So you'll see a lot of really interesting components that come into this more informational type of campaign, as well as out of home media that you'll see. So we do plan to work with community partners and have tabletops at libraries and senior centers and coffee shops. So really engaging with the public in this particular campaign. So we're really looking forward to that.
And if I could add one more quick item. I would encourage all the public out there to go to our website right now. We do have voterlookup.ca. You can go and check your information and make sure it's correct ahead of the election or ahead of voting day. And it's already available, and you can get on that as soon as possible. So that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I just encourage you to be as specific as possible about what you're trying to accomplish so that, you know, you can align the tactics with that and then be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hilsinger. Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one brief question through you to the city clerk or the deputy city clerk, sorry. The report says that you're looking to conduct a voter information campaign before, during, and after the municipal election to provide information on when to vote, where to vote, and why their vote matters. So I'm wondering if the after the campaign is a typo, or what would be involved in after the campaign advertising?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, just the results of the election and those types of any kind of reporting after that needs to be required on the website. So mostly focusing on the results of the election.
Okay, perfect. But in terms of the information on when people can vote and where they can vote, that'll be in the lead up to the election.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ellen.
Just a comment to Tessa and Madison. You know, we know that the demographic from 18 to 24, it was only 18% turnout, and another percentage was people with disabilities and you know, wearing a different hat. I think it'd be really important in terms of community partners to reach out to like the YMCA's, Algoma Family Services, especially the Rebound North program, as well the food banks and the soup kitchens and community organizations that support youth and the IFC. I think that would be really critical in doing an engagement tool with them. I can tell you that from my experience, a lot of youth with disabilities do not vote. They don't know how, they're pretty intimidated. So I think almost if you could have like a little video, that would be really useful, because a lot of some people with communication disorders, they need that visual. And then I think that would really, help increase accessibility and reduce the barriers as well. So thanks very much for all of this information. It was a great report. And yeah, excited to see what's going to happen. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else on that matter? Seeing none, that seems to wrap up consent, unless council has any other. Council Christian, you have another consent matter?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Mayor, 6.20.
Go ahead.
ACOM Advisory Services. This question through you to Ms. Paddle. Or Mr. Elliott, I guess. I see in here that we're trying to extend the 5-year term, and it says we set a $75,000 a year upset limit. I'm just wondering if you could summarize or highlight any year that we've actually gone beyond that amount, or what typically do we spend for those services in the last 5 years? Can you just ballpark it? Like, do we typically go over? Are we substantially under? What's the profile there?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't have the annual numbers. I don't think we've exceeded it excessively. Otherwise, we would be asking for more. So I think 75 is the appropriate amount. What we're doing there is seeking a quick way to get advice on the mostly on the wastewater treatment plants themselves on process. It's a way of having expertise looking over the PUC's shoulder when it comes to major operational matters, such as anything from the treatment process itself to setting elevations for pumps coming on and pumps coming off. There's a lot of danger in trying to do that kind of thing ourselves. So we prefer the expertise of this firm, and that's why we recommend this many years ago. It works well, and we'd like to continue it.
Yeah, and I appreciate those comments, and I can understand their specialty. I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, but if we do not utilize the full 75,000 in the budgeted year, I'm assuming that money goes back into that account. Is the ask the following year or the budget that we ask for the following year reflective of the extra money that's left over from the previous year? I don't know if you're able to answer that question.
Mr. Mayor to Councillor Christian, I think if there's an underspend that's not carried forward, we would just go with the 75,000 a year. Also note that this money this is from the sewer surcharge. It's not from the levy. It's money that comes from the PUC sanitary bills.
Okay, that's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anybody else on 6.2? 620? Okay. Council, any other matters in the consent agenda? That looks like the end of the consent agenda, Madam Clerk. Then we have 6.3, which was accepted, right?
Yes. So under item 6 consent agenda, a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian, resolve that all the items listed under date March 21st, 2022, agenda item 6, consent agenda be approved as recommended, save and accept agenda item 6.3.
All in favor? That is carried. So that brings us to 6.3. Councillor Shoemaker, I'm going to start with you because you wanted that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's also an associated bylaw from that I'd like to pull from the consent on this one as well. Through you to either Michelle or the CAO, this report's come to us March 21st here for an extension dated April 1st. So if we turn this extension down, then what happens?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we wouldn't have an agreement in place for the coming year. If you turn it down, we would have to, we'd be looking for direction beyond that, whether you wished us to go out then and do an RFP. It is a significant one. I did speak with the CFO, both the preparation of the RFP, the evaluation of it, and then should we go with another provider, the administration involved in changing it would be significant. The CFO and finance staff recognize that it is time to go and test the market. That's why they've recommended a 1-year extension only, and it is the intention to test the market next year.
Okay, then there's two issues I've got with this. One is the procedural issue of when these things come to us, and the second is the actual content of the report or the recommendation of the report. So from a procedural standpoint, I think it is clear that the assumption is that council is going to approve this because it doesn't give us enough time to do what you're suggesting would need to be done if we turned it down.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we agree with that. I do know that this item was overlooked to a degree by both the provider and ourselves as to when the agreement was coming to an end. So we do recognize that it has been brought to in a very short time frame, and it does, in essence, kind of preclude what council may want to do.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a very honest answer. I do note that the agreement includes a 90-day cancellation clause. So if there is direction to go in a different direction here, then would we be able to start whatever process we needed to and then cancel, give 90 days cancellation notice whenever we're ready to take the next step with a different provider?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, from a legal standpoint, yes, we would. What I would suggest, if it were council's wish to look at that a report be sought just to give a little more detail on what that would involve.
Okay. Well, okay, then you've given me a couple of directions that I'm going to propose here, and I'll explain my reasoning why. Last year, we were all, I think, surprised that the Royal Bank was abandoning our downtown and consolidating their offices uptown. And we are investing in our downtown. Some of us disagree with that investment. Others are supportive of it. But nevertheless, we all agree as a council that we need investment in our downtown. And Royal Bank has shown that they are not committed to our downtown. And therefore, I don't believe that we should be committed to them for that reason. There are 5 major banks in Canada. All of the other major banks have a branch downtown. And I think those are the banks that should receive our support. And for that reason, I don't support this. And I would ask that we have staff go out, develop an RFP, bring back a report on whether we could cancel the agreement within 90 days of getting a response back to that RFP, and seek another banking provider that is committed to our downtown, with assurances that that provider will stay in our downtown for the term of the agreement.
So that's a fundamentally different. So I think just procedurally, Councilor Shoemaker, what you would do is we have to deal with this motion in front of us. If this fails, then you're going to put forward that proposal, because that's not an amendment of the.
No, yes,
the-
okay, that would be the direction I'd be seeking to give post failure of this
Okay.
vote.
Did you have any further comments on this?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Councilor Bruni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regarding the RFP, if this passes, it's a 5-year term with a 5-year option.
So 1 year. Would it be a 1-year extension?
No, when the RFP
Okay,
goes
yeah,
out. And in the report, it says that the short-term investments would not be included in this RFP. My question is, why wouldn't it not be included? Wouldn't it benefit us if everything was all in one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, I'm not sure on that. I will get an answer for you from the CFO, who was unable to be here tonight. I suspect it may have one element may be as to where we place our short-term investments.
Thank you. Okay. Councilor Nero?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification on where we might go with this, on this 90-day cancellation clause, if we're waiting, if we don't approve this and we're waiting for another report from staff, which could be in reality our next meeting at the soonest, which is almost 30 days out of the 90, do we still have time to go through an RFP before the 90-day cancellation clause?
Okay, so I'll give Councilor Shoemaker a chance to just clarify what he's saying, because it might answer your question.
Sure,
If
either
it-
Councilor Shoemaker or the CAO whoever can answer it, because I'm not sure what that 30 days does.
My intention in talking about the 90-day cancellation clause would not be to trigger that now. It would be to extend now and cancel, relying on that 90-day cancellation
Okay.
provision after an RFP was completed.
Okay, so we would
Yeah.
approve this for 1 year and then, okay, that makes more sense.
I think you'd be outside of whether or not you legally could do it. I think you got a bit of a bad faith issue if you approve it tonight, but also trigger the 90-day cancellation clause, as you approve it. I think there's just going to be a simple timing issue here. I think Councilor Shoemaker started with a relevant point that this is getting to a slate. And the CAO was very honest about, why that's the case. To me, there isn't really a significant issue here. I appreciate the Councilor Shoemaker's point and concern about supporting our downtown, but we need the banking services. And I frankly believe it's going to take staff some time to develop an RFP for those banking services. This report anticipates and conceptualizes that is happening. So the service provider knows that we're going out to market. So that's transparent and upfront. And it seems to me that by the time they develop that, which I think will be comprehensive and it's going to be sophisticated to a degree because it deals with a lot of our banking arrangements, it's going to be a number of months. And then it's going to go out for proposal. Then the proposals are going to come back. And then if we see a proposal that we like, I think Councilor Shoemaker's point is, well, we could kind of trigger it and move into it, which all is in good faith. And I don't see a problem with it. To me, the natural course of action is to support the recommendation staff's asking for tonight, but make it clear to staff that we want you to get on the process of getting out to market on this. And when they get out to market on it, we either have a 90-day out, or by the time it comes back, we're going to be close to the end of this year in any event. So, I don't know that more has to be done. I intend on supporting the resolution because I frankly think that, or the staff report, because I think that we're going to get to the end that Councilor Shoemaker is looking to get to in the natural course of things. Councilor Christian.
Just for what it's worth, I agree with what you're saying. I wholeheartedly agree with what Councillor Shoemaker is saying. I think we've served notice and we've given all the reasons why we want to pursue it vigorously. But from a practical standpoint, I agree with what you're saying. We need to proceed the way it's suggested with an outcome that perhaps will lead us to where Councillor Shoemaker wants to bring us for the reasons that he cited.
Councilor Dufour.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Would we be able to, as you suggested, pass this report, but with an amendment ensuring that staff include the presence of a downtown branch as one of the rubrics upon which the proposals are marked?
I'm going to defer to the CAO on that because it's a tendering issue and I don't want to speak directly.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, while we appreciate council's intent on that, I wouldn't want to see an amendment passed tonight. I would like to assess that within as to whether we can fit that squarely within an RFP process.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. For what it's worth, I certainly support the spirit of Councillor Shoemaker's resolution. I was considering questions along the same lines myself, and it would be nice if the city would bank at a branch downtown. That said, I'm happy to follow the process that makes the most sense to get us to that goal.
Thank you, Councilor Dufour. I think there's a distinction between making it a requirement and identifying it as an asset. And I think the CEO would just like to probably assess the difference there. And potentially, if we have language in a resolution that limits staff, they have to go down a certain path. So, I'm comfortable giving him the room to assess that. I think it's pretty clear that they see the sentiment come from council. Councilor Shoemaker articulated it well. I haven't heard anybody disagree with it. So I'm sure staff will take that under advisement as it proceeds and structure that to the degree it's permissible. Councilor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just from a procedural standpoint, in approving, it's a bylaw tonight, could we, or do we need to direct that staff commence forthwith planning the RFP process?
I frankly don't think we need to. We'll ask for the CEO's feedback on that. I think he got that message loud and clear.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we do have the message loud and clear, and I'll follow up with staff at our senior staff meeting tomorrow to ensure that it is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this matter?
There isn't a motion associated with 6.3 on consent, but I will open the bylaw vote at this time.
Okay.
So
go ahead, Madam Clerk.
I'm just going to read the motion. So resolve that bylaw 2022-45 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the city and Royal Bank of Canada for a one-year extension to the current banking services agreement be passed in open council this 21st day of March 2022. And everyone should have it up on their screens. I'm just waiting for Councillor Dufour and Councillor Scott.
All in favor? All in favor.
Okay.
Including Dufour and Scott.
All right, I have close that. And that will bring us to 7.1.1 COVID update, and under agenda item 7.1.1. I have a motions by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian resolve that the report of the CAO dated March 21st, 2022 concerning COVID update March 21, 2022 be received as information.
Okay, council, any questions for the CEO on his COVID update report? Seeing none. That brings us to 7.3.1. Oh, we have to have a support, yeah. All in favor? Motion carried.
Councillor Dufour and Councillor Hilsinger as well were
Yeah, they were.
carried unanimously.
I've lost Councillor Hilsinger here. She's no longer showing on the screen, so. Okay,
Okay. Then close that and we will move to 7.3.1 public art policy. And I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, although if, is she still in the meeting? Okay. Oh, there she is. Okay, sorry. Motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian resolved that the report of the Manager of Recreation and Culture dated March 21st, 2022 concerning adoption of the public art policy be approved.
okay, so council, do we have any questions at Councillor Bezelwell? We'll start with you.
Just a comment, this is long overdue. We haven't had a public art policy. It was part of conversation back in my days at Sioux Youth Association and the Arts Council. And it's great to see all of the deliverables from the planning and strategic planning that was done by the consulting firm actually coming to fruition. My only concern is under 7.3.3, there's only $40,000 allocated to public art for 2021, 2022. So I think it's important for us as a community to really rally art supporters, funding opportunities. And I went through the policy, it's well done, and looking forward to really enhancing our community with it. And thanks to Virginia and the work and all the work that the Cultural Vitality Committee does as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bezelwell. Any other comments on 7.3.1? I see none.
I've opened that for the vote.
When you've read, you've read the resolution?
Yes.
So all in favor? Motion carried. You have me there voting?
Yeah, I have you not in the affirmative.
Yeah, yeah. It didn't come up on my screen though.
Oh.
You got me now.
Yeah. So I have everyone, just have Councillor
There it is. Okay,
Bruni absent. So we'll close that. Everyone else voted in favor.
that brings us to 7.3.2 cultural policy revisions.
There is no motion for this. It's with the bylaws and will be read at that time.
Any questions or comments on this? Councillor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It kind of relates to 7.3.3.
Yeah.
But if we wanted to, I think if we pass the policy as recommended by Recreation and Culture staff, it is the new language that we'll be passing and not the language that's recommended by finance staff.
That's correct.
Okay. So in that case, I'd like to amend the cultural plan to include the language that's recommended by finance staff instead.
Okay, is that clear to council? So there's a major distinction here and it's about the 1%, just to make sure I understand your point. So if we accept the changes to the policy as recommended by the committee, it's not a matter of trying to kind of hit that 1% target. It's a matter of ensuring that you hit the 1% target. So if this new policy was in place, for instance, when we did the twin pad and just using round numbers, we would have had to find $300,000 to do art in that facility. So I think with Councillor Shoemaker, so we have the financial report on the agenda. And what Councillor Shoemaker is suggesting is he'd like to accept the policy, he wants to pass the policy, but he wants to refer to and use the language suggested by finance.
Right.
So that councils are not obligated if they don't see an ability to find that money, because we currently don't have it in the levy anywhere. So on a case-by-case basis, you would have to try and find that extra money. And you might very well try and find it, and you might find it, you might do it. But Councillor Shoemaker, I think, is trying to avoid having language where it's necessary that you do in the event that you can't. That's fair?
That's correct. It's I think the distinction is the policy currently says that we will ensure the dedication of 1%. And what finance staff is recommending is ensure or aim to provide up to 1% or something along those lines.
Mr. CEO, do you have anything to add there, or is my synopsis?
No, that's the correct synopsis, Mr. Mayor. The up to was how the old policy or former policy read. So it would be maintaining what the old policy said.
So to put a finer point on Councillor Shoemaker's amendment here would be to accept all of the revisions suggested by the committee, except for that revision, which would then leave the policy with the previous language.
That's right.
Okay, yeah. So Councillor Christian's pointing here. So who virtually is the Councillor Hilsinger? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So unfortunately, the old language didn't result in any investment in public art. And so here's the dilemma that we're in right now. We know that public art is a very important part of a culturally vibrant community. We have over years past not taken the opportunity to invest funds in whatever way the language would make sense. And so now we sit here today with a very low public art budget and very little to know. There is some, and we have made great strides in terms of murals and other things in the last few years, but we are devoid in many cases of art that could enhance our community, represent our community. And so what do we, I'm asking a question now to Councillor Shoemaker or perhaps to others. How do we resolve this? How do we get from up to 1%, which has meant nothing in the last number of years, many number of years, versus working towards having funds available so that we can represent our culture and our history and art and our people in a public way?
So did you want to address that, Councillor Shoemaker?
I think it is addressed in the finance report, which is the next report. And I realize we're currently talking about 7.3.
But they go together in my mind.
Yes. So I think that the answer is that the report sets out that from 2019 to 2022, we've increased cultural funding by $95,000 or so. I'm doing rough math in my head here. But those investments have allowed us to do public art, like, you know, the murals and other aspects of and 40,000 specifically for public art every year, as we just approved in the 7.3.1. So we are, if we accept the new wording, in my opinion, essentially directing staff without any commitment to provide it to them, to find 355, I think it was 355,000 additional dollars for public art when there are other competing priorities, unfortunately. That's the answer that I think is in the finance report.
Do you have anything you want to add, Mr. CEO?
To you, Mr. Mayor, and council. No, I think that encapsulates the debate.
I've thought quite a bit about this myself because I appreciate the work that this committee has done. And so this committee is sending something back to us. And I think to Councillor Hilsinger's point, what they're saying to us is, you know, for years, there's really no investment, and they're looking for a way to leverage it so that there's always an ongoing investment. And I think there should be. But, you know, I'm not comfortable committing future councils to this number without having some sense of how that could be funded or where the financing could come from. And there's nothing prohibiting us from accepting all the rest of the changes that they suggested, with gratitude for their work, but recognizing that we're not comfortable committing this amount of money without having a discussion about how it would impact the levy or where that money would come from or how we could finance it. So what I would suggest is that for tonight's purposes, we approve the matter with the exception of that one language change, which would leave the policy as it was. And we refer the matter that relates to potential funding sources and funding opportunities or specifically to answer the question that Councillor Hilsinger is putting to us here in the council chamber. How do we move something like this forward and find a way to invest in public art on a consistent basis? Back to staff. And ask staff to do some work on that, which they could bring to that committee and then also to this council chamber. Is that a reasonable way for council to proceed tonight? Madam Clerk, did you need any clarity on what I just did there?
I'm just trying to look to see where we want to put the amendment for the discussion, because 7.3.2 is just the bylaw.
Yeah. So we in 7.3.3 is the financial report.
Okay.
So I think the amendment has to be in the bylaw, because the bylaw is where the language is changed. Is that not correct?
And so
Or we could table a motion from the floor that approves all of the amendments with the exception of the.
just trying to
Yeah. I won't
open the
speak.
bylaw. I'm gonna put an amending motion to the bylaw.
Councilor Nero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just procedurally, have we not just approved that bylaw? We just voted to approve it. How can we amend it at this point?
We didn't vote yet.
Well, we did under 7.3.2. The bylaws under that agenda item.
The bylaw wasn't under 7.3.
It's not under 7.3.3.
No, but we didn't vote on 7.3.2 yet. We voted on 7.3.1.
I have not opened the bylaw for voting.
On one, we voted that.
On 7.3.2, I'm just adding an amendment to
We
the
haven't
bylaw
voted on
motion.
7.3.2.
Okay.
Yeah.
My mistake, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
So
I
we're
make
going
them all the
to,
You're ahead of us. That's all, Councilor.
Well, I had questions on 3.3, but we went to there with 7.3.2. I'm with you.
Just ignore
Okay.
him. And focus on what you need to do.
okay. So we're going to accept
All the proposed
all the proposed
amendments to the cultural policy.
cultural policy.
Except for the amendment requiring the commitment of 1%. And I think as a result of that, it'll revert to how it currently reads. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay, and I'll need a mover for the amendment.
Yeah, so that I think Councilor Shoemaker would move that, and Councilor Bruni would second it. Can we just put the referral back to staff on the same motion? And then we don't have to do it twice. Refer the matter relating to financing public art policy back to staff. for review and consideration.
It's just loading here. And I have the amendments, so resolved that all proposed amendments to the cultural policy, save and except requiring the commitment of 1%. And this matter referred to, refer the financing of public art policy for review and consideration back to staff.
Okay, Councilor, are we comfortable with that as a resolution to this? So, Councilor Hilsinger?
I'm not sure if this is possible, but if I heard properly, so it's review back to staff for financing. So is that specific enough, as in, coming from me personally, I'd like to see a resolution to this, not the status quo, so that we make some progress here. So is that wording to the CAO or whomever, is that specifically saying the staff are going to come back with suggestions and ideas on how we are going to get where we are not at this time.
I'd answer that no, it's not. It's referring the matter back to them for their consideration without any additional direction. And they would report back to us. Staff does participate in these meetings and listen to what we're saying, and as a result of that, it gets a sense of what we're looking for direction on. So I don't know that we need to add any more specifics to it, but if you're inclined to do that, you'd have to do it now before we call the vote on it.
I will take your words in good faith, and I look forward to a resolution that can help us do better here. Thank you.
Okay, so Madam Clerk, if we can move on with this then.
Yeah, I've just opened the vote.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. No, that's the amendment, right?
This is the amendment,
You have
yes,
to do the
and
main
I have
motion now.
Councillor Dufour. Were you in the affirmative?
It didn't pop up. Yes, I'm in the affirmative.
So I have a unanimous vote. I'll close that, and then I will open the bylaw. So under agenda item 11.1.5, bylaw 2022-47, Cultural Advisory Committee, says resolve that bylaw 2022-47 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2013-117, being a bylaw to reestablish a cultural advisory board, and to repeal bylaw 2015-117, be passed as amended in open council this 21st day of March 2022.
All in favor? Motion carried.
And it was unanimous?
Yeah, looked to me like it was.
Alright. Close that vote. And then we just have to move to 7. I know it was together, but 7.3.3. We do have a motion, and under agenda item 7.3.3, cultural policy, public art policy revisions, financial implications. I have a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian. Resolve that the report of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer dated March 21st, 2022 concerning financial implications of the recommended cultural policy changes be received as information. And I will open that.
All in favor? Carried.
Councillor. And Councillor Scott, are you in the affirmative? Yep. And close that vote, unanimous. All right, that will bring us to 7.8.1, the Tourism Board. And we had one vacancy for the Tourism Board. And I have a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian, resolve that Brad Robinson be appointed to the Tourism Board from March 21st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022.
All in favor? Thank you to Brad for wanting to support and participate in our tourism.
And the vote is up. Councillor Dufour in the affirmative. And Councillor, okay, unanimous decision. And that brings us to 7.8.2, the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board. We have one member of council that needs to be appointed, and I had Councillor Bezo Allen interested in that vacancy.
Awesome. I don't see anybody else putting their hands up, so that's good. Appreciate your willingness to do that, Councillor Bezo-Allen. So all in favor? Duly appointed. I'm sure you'll do great work there.
I'm just going to read and open this one. Resolve that Councillor Bezo-Allen be appointed to the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board from March 21st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022.
And everybody was in favor.
Okay. Unanimous affirmative. All right. That'll bring us to 8.1. Highway 17 North improvements. I have a motions by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian, whereas during the winter of 2021 through 2022, Highway 17 North of Sault Ste. Marie has been closed on at least 11 occasions due to inclement weather or collisions. And whereas the close of any highway, especially a 2-lane highway, in remote areas of Ontario presents life safety risk to any persons that need essential services that are offered in urban centers. And whereas for many years, Sault Ste. Marie and surrounding communities have sought highway improvements, especially ongoing calls to 4-lane Highway 17. And whereas improvements to Highway 17 North are urgently needed to ensure uninterrupted access by residents and seasonal users of hospital and other essential services only offered in Sault Ste. Marie. And whereas the provincial government has recently announced a plan to invest $82 billion in transportation improvements over the next year, not all of which should be spent in the GTA, as is often the case with provincial transportation dollars. And whereas provincial election is near, where all parties will be looking to champion local issues. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Sault Ste. Marie call on all provincial political parties to prioritize improvements to Highway 17 North of Sault Ste. Marie in their policy platforms, and that the mayor be requested to draft correspondence to the local candidates in the upcoming provincial election, setting out this council's position.
Okay, Councilor Shoemaker, we're going to start with you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I had noted somewhere here what dates that the highway was closed that I could find anyways. It seemed for some time in December, or maybe it was early January, there was closures constantly on the highway north, either from Batchewana to Wawa or between Sault Ste. Marie and Batchewana. As I note in the resolution, this presents a safety risk. We are in Sault Ste. Marie, the urban center, where people get their groceries, get their healthcare, get their provincial, federal, municipal well, not municipal services, but get their provincial, federal services and their essential services. So we have to be accessible to our surrounding communities in order for people to be able to protect their well-being and continue on safely. And so it is crucial that the highway not be closed for extended periods of time, as it has been this winter, or significant periods of time as it has been this winter. So we've got a provincial election coming up, as we know, in a couple months. And this is as good of an opportunity as any to put all the parties on the hot seat to ask them their position on this issue. And I'm hoping that council will endorse this resolution. And so we can get some responses from our candidates on their positions on this issue.
Thank you, Councilor Shoemaker. Councilor Christian, do you want to add anything?
The other point I would raise is that, I'm familiar with the immediate northern part of Sault Ste. Marie heading towards Batchewana, Haviland. I know of 4 or 5 accidents in the last year and a half. Beyond just road closures, just the simple fact that it's 2-lane creates problems for people exiting driveways or entering the highway area. So I think it's worth our while to push this issue for sure. Not only for weather issues, but for accident prevention.
So, okay. Councilor Gardy.
Communicate this to the federal government as well, in a not necessarily as part of this motion, but in the not too distant future, because it is the Trans-Canada Highway. I believe there should be infrastructure dollars provided to the province to complete this portion of the highway. It's been talked about for decades, and so maybe Mr. Sheehan and or whoever's responsible at the federal level could be receive a communication from us as well in the near future. Thanks.
Any other comments on this? Motion's been read. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you.
Councillor Gardy, you close that unanimous vote. We'll move to agenda item 8.2, anti-war. I have a motion by Councillors Bazawalan and Hilsinger. Whereas on the 24th of February, 2022, Russia began a military invasion of Ukraine. And whereas Ukraine gained independence from Russia in 1991 and is considered a neutral state, and whereas under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, an attack on a NATO country is considered an attack on all NATO countries, and they all must help to restore security. And whereas Ukraine is not considered a NATO country, and as all citizens of Canada enjoy the rights and freedoms as a NATO member country. Now therefore be it resolved that as Council of the City of Sault Ste. Marie recognizes that all people of Sault Ste. Marie are a peace-loving people who stand together in opposition to war in all forms and in all corners of the globe, and further recognizes that all people of Sault Ste. Marie stand together in demanding an immediate and peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine, and that Council urges the Government of Canada to de-escalate war in Ukraine by demanding peace and diplomacy on the international stage, and that all municipalities across our country put pressure on the Government of Canada towards this end by passing similar resolutions.
Councillor Reswell.
Thank you. This came about because we had a communication from a constituent regarding the war and wondering if we were going to make a statement. I think just from the activities yesterday with 500 people at the Interfaith Walk, that only just supports what our community is doing. Councillor Shoemaker and I were at the Mass at St. Mary's Church a few weeks ago, and it was really great to see a lot of variety of people there supporting. So I think this resolution, I want to thank Councillor Hilsinger for seconding it, just supports what our community is already doing. And we certainly would like to see other municipalities adopt the same type of resolution. So thank you so much.
Councillor Hilsinger, do you want to speak to this?
Only briefly. I was at the Walk of Love yesterday, and it's very clear, and the sentiment was there, and we need to stand up for what's wrong in this world. And I find this very difficult because it's just so horrific and so horrible, and war is horrible, and it feels very hopeless to me that there's very little that we can do, but we can make clear how we feel about it, and I would certainly appreciate the unanimous support from my colleagues.
So look, I think in spirit we can all get behind obviously this. I want to make a few comments about what our government's done, our federal government's done, because I don't want the motion to be read as a criticism of it, because I actually think that Canada has been a leader in responding to what's happening in the Ukraine. And I want to commend the federal government for the steps they've taken to respond to it. I think there's very little that Canada can do to actually force a de-escalation of the war. But I think Canada as a nation has led here, has made significant contributions to deter the war, has made significant contributions to support the country of Ukraine. And I'm proud of what I think is some very good foreign policy decisions that the country has made, and the leadership that the country's shown in participating in the anti-war efforts. In spirit, I completely agree with what we're saying here, which is we stand against this, and we want to commend the really brave and tremendous people of the Ukraine for what they're doing, and I want to acknowledge that. Councillor Shoemaker, do you have any comments in that respect?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I too had a bit of hesitation with this resolution when it was initially sent to us, only because the Ukraine was attacked unprovoked by Russia, who is the aggressor here, and so we cannot be calling for peace without condition, because the condition obviously needs to be that the Ukraine needs to be returned to an unoccupied state, and that Russia needs to be expelled from the country. So I think that the spirit of the resolution does capture that. There's a couple words here that I had some hesitation about, but I'm happy to support it given the overall intent of it.
Any other comments, council? Looking to the screen, okay, all in favor? Motion is carried.
I close that vote. It's unanimous. And that brings us to item 8.3, housing affordability. I have a motion by councillors Dufour and Hilsinger, whereas the background data for the new official plan of Sault Ste. Marie states that even under provincial affordability thresholds, 30 to 40% of people in Sault Ste. Marie cannot afford average rent or cost of home ownership. Whereas building housing that is affordable to this cohort of citizens, according to modern building code, is not possible for the private sector to build without significant grants or subsidies. And whereas the provincial land transfer tax is a tax levied on the total purchase price of a property in Ontario, whose real estate markets have increased 30 to 40% over the past 2 years, with presumable land transfer tax revenues growing commensurately. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Mayor Provenzano write a letter to Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, outlining council support for a provincial co-investment fund that will partner with District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Boards, housing providers, and developers to provide direct grants to build housing that is affordable for low-income citizens. Further, that such fund, in recognition of the growth challenges in the north, have a northern portion of the fund that is greater than the sum of land transfer tax generated here.
Councillor Dufour, you wrote this resolution, so I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the genesis of the resolution came from my close reading of the Housing and Affordability Task Force report that was generated by the province a few weeks ago. This was something that was kind of hinted at in one of the appendices and seemed to me to be actually a really sensible economic idea, which was to take a non-income tax source of revenue generated by the province. It's generated by the growth in real estate values, and reinvest that into ensuring as much affordability as possible for those who are being left out by said growth in the real estate market. So it's a policy suggestion that I saw hinted at, but that I have not seen a lot of political support move for. So I decided to start getting some political support moved towards it. And I hope that my peers here on City Council in Sault Ste. Marie will join me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hilsinger. Did you want to speak to it?
We need some help here, and I really appreciate Councillor Dufour for his intensity in this area. I'm happy to support this idea.
Anything else, council? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried unanimously.
Close that vote. That'll bring us to 8.4, housing supply. I have a motion by councillors Dufour and Christian. Whereas the city of Sault Ste. Marie, like many other northern municipalities, struggles to maintain assessment growth rates commensurate with the cost of providing municipal services. And whereas the draft official plan for Sault Ste. Marie 2020 highlights the need for an increase in housing supply. And whereas infill, purpose-built rental and densification developments provide an increase in housing supply without requiring extensions or increases in municipal services. And whereas the provincial government has recently published the report of the Housing Affordability Task Force, which recommends, among other things, as of right zoning bylaws that would, subject to maximum lot coverage, height and parking minimums, allow up to 4 units to occupy property that currently has single-family residential zoning. Now, therefore, be it resolved that staff be requested to report on the potential benefits and costs of Sault Ste. Marie adopting as of right zoning in its new official plan.
Councillor Dufour, I'm back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this resolution was kind of informed by my take on some of the experiences that we've had as a council reviewing certain rezoning applications over the course of our term. Some of them that come to mind, I believe there's a duplex over on Garden Avenue, other similar projects where the density being suggested was clearly something that made a lot of sense for the city, yet the person doing the development still had to go through the entirety of the rezoning process in order to build that development. And while I'm generally quite in favor of having as much public input as possible. I think we've hit a crisis point in terms of our housing supply, to where we need to make some difficult choices about where the public interest and the public good lies. Does it lie in increasing supply as fast as we can, or does it lie in adding extra cost and time to these developments? And I personally believe that I think we need to start increasing supply as fast as we can, and adopting an as of right zoning bylaw would help in that respect. And so this resolution is hopefully going to give staff the information that they need to bring us back some more information, so that we can make a fully informed decision.
Yeah, so for clarity, this is a report back on it. It's not actually adopting the concept equivocally. Councillor, so before I get to Councillor Bruni, Councillor Christian, did you want to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was happy to second this. I think Councillor Dufour hit on a critical piece. It's a balancing act to ensure that we have enough housing inventory. I know that perhaps some people in the community might at first blush have a bit of concern with this, but there's a much wider and more substantial issue here, and that's the housing crisis. And we need to come up with innovative ways to address it. And I certainly think a report from staff would be worth our while, because this issue needs to be addressed, and sooner rather than later.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this, but I do have a caution regarding the zoning bylaw that would, subject to the maximum lot coverage, height, and parking minimums, allow 4 units to occupy properties that currently have a single family residential zoning. That's where my concern is, but I will wait for the report to come back. And we'll go from there. Thanks.
Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too, I'm going to support this motion. I do have a concern similar to Councillor Bruni's. And I would assume, I guess, that when the report comes back, it not only reports on the potential benefits, but also talks about potential drawbacks of doing this, or the negative aspect of doing this. Because I can see the benefit, but I think in the report we should include everything.
I agree. I think staff will, I trust staff will deal with it substantively. And we have to look at it from all perspectives. Any other comments or questions on this? Okay, all in favor? Motion is carried unanimously.
Will bring us to 8.5, undeveloped property in Gateway site. I have a motion by Councillors Dufour and Vezawalan. Whereas the city of Sault Ste. Marie owns a large piece of undeveloped property in the Canal District, commonly referred to as the Gateway site. And whereas the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation owns and operates a number of residential properties, including high-density residential properties within the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And whereas the city of Sault Ste. Marie wants to encourage additional residential development within the community, and specifically high-density residential development in the downtown core. And whereas the Gateway site could be an appropriate site to consider a large-scale, high-density residential development. Now therefore be it resolved that the CAO and Deputy CAO Community Development and Enterprise Services be directed to work with the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation to consider and assess a high-density residential development for the Gateway site and report back to council on its determinations.
So council, I'm going to speak to this first, and then I'll go to Councillor Dufour, because I wrote the motion, and I convened a meeting a few weeks back with Councillor Dufour and Mr. Nadeau from the DSAB and Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corp, and Mr. Barbin from the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corp and the DSAB, and Mr. White and Mr. Vare. So this would come as no surprise to them. But look, there's something I've been kind of considering a lot lately, and with increasing frequency, partly as a result of this role, but partly as a result of my private role, and the real estate kind of transactions that I see in this community. And we want our community to grow. We see by the most recent census that it hasn't, and that's not because people aren't moving here. or that's not because we're not attracting families. It's because our death rate is outstripping our birth rate. And that's because we have an older than average population in our community. But we also have some other really attractive metrics. We have a lower living wage here, which means that you have to earn less money to be able to afford the things that you need to afford to get by. And very smart people, whose opinion I respect, have been saying for a while now, but more loudly more recently, that Ontario is sorely underbuilt. And I think, we see that in our own community. We haven't seen a lot of units come online. And I am personally convinced that if we had more residential units available here, that more people would be moving here. And that one of the things that's going to hamper our growth in the time to come, in the years to come, is access to residential facilities. Is not just a single family residential, but you have people that are in a home that want to move to an apartment or want to move to a condo that can't find the unit that they would find adequate to live in. We've seen lots of private capital come in from out of the community. And there's a reason for that. Private capital found it an attractive place to invest. It's bought up a lot of residential units. And I know that people have reached out to you because people have reached out to me with concerns about the price of housing, concerns about the fact that there's lots of units being purchased and that, rent will likely go up. And frankly, we need a multifaceted approach to this. It's not just about building affordable housing. We need to do that. Councillor Dufour is correct, but it's about getting more housing online because more housing makes housing more affordable. And we have a significant supply problem here. I'm seeing houses in my private life go for $500,000 that would have just 3 years ago gone for in the neighborhood of 250 to 300. And I can demonstrate that with prices that I look at on the consideration when you look at the property abstracts and you see them increase and see them go up. So I've been thinking about this and been looking at this. We talk about our downtown. We talk about wanting more high density residential in our downtown. And I thought to myself, we have this piece of property that we've been waiting for someone else to come along and develop. When one of our main partners, the DSAP, has a housing corporation that owns and operates a high density residential. So it didn't seem to me that there was any harm in us investigating as a city the prospect of developing something there. That's not to mean that we are ultimately going to do that. We might decide it's the right thing to do, and that development might generate revenue for the housing corporation in the city that we can then use to do other things to help our housing supply. But it seemed to me a very natural thing, considering that we are the owner of the real estate and we have a partner that is engaged in that business, that we take a look at it together and see if we could develop an interesting project for that site. So this motion just directs staff to do that. They could be doing that, I suppose, in any event, but it's not a small idea and it's not something that they should really freelance without knowing that council would want them to be looking at and spending that time in it. So I told them I thought the natural step would be to bring it to you to make sure that you're all comfortable with them looking at it and that they would go work together as identified and look at that, see if there is something worth doing. And if there's something worth doing, they will bring it back to us. I think a natural question would be, well, what if somebody else wants to develop it? And if somebody else wants to develop it, there's nothing stopping somebody else from approaching us and asking to develop it. But the reality is there isn't much activity on that site now. Well, there isn't any activity on that site now. And we don't have any proposed developments in front of us for that site. And I don't see any issue with us going off and taking a look at how we can maybe do one ourselves. And that's the spirit of the meeting I convened and the spirit of the resolution that's in front of you. I want to thank Councillor Dufour for working with me on that and for agreeing to put the resolution in front of council and Councillor Brezow for seconding it. Before I take other questions, I'll give Councillor Dufour a chance to speak.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just in addition to your comments, I just wanted to, point out that this past term of council has really moved the needle on this site. We've managed to remove a rail line, to acquire property on Bay Street, to complete the parcel. This is really what I see as the next logical step to hopefully seeing something built on that site. Of course, previously we had a project that did not ultimately decide to go forward, but I think that embarking on this kind of investigation here makes a lot of sense, because that property, because of our decisions, has become a more and more attractive place, and hopefully will result in some development. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I saw Councillor Bruni's hand go up and Councillor Christian's hands go up. So I'll go Bruni first, then Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to ask you a question, because
Sure.
you said that you've been working on this with Councillor Dufour. If there is another developer that comes forward, will they be entertained as well as the Housing Corporation has been entertained with this idea?
This resolution shouldn't be taken to commit this property to the Housing Corporation. So they're gonna work together and look at it. But if another developer comes along with a development that's interesting to council, that development will not be blocked that development will get to council. So this is a direction to staff to work on this together. And if they see a good development, but someone else brings along development, council would ultimately be able to make a decision on which development they wanted to move forward with and why.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this does not commit this piece of property to that project. It's just instruction to look at doing something.
Thank you.
So we'll go to Councillor Christian, then Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garden.
I appreciate your last comment from Councillor Bruni's question. I certainly want the public to know that we are open. That's important. But to the greater point, and you touched on it, it's about supply and demand, and that's what's driving prices in the Sioux. And I think it's important to remind everybody that we need to do something like this, because on one hand, we're marketing Sault Ste. Marie as an affordable alternative to Southern Ontario. And until we address the supply issue in the Sioux, which is escalating prices, we're not doing a good enough job of marketing ourselves. Our prices we're starting to close that gap between the differences in prices in Metro Toronto and Sault Ste. Marie. We have to keep that gap wide enough to make our marketing efforts viable. And you do that by having more housing stock. So I support this 100%.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think a big hangup on this property for a number of years, from what I understand anyways, is the cost to potentially clean up any environmental damage that historically has occurred on this property. So as part of this report, and this question through you to the CAO, would the cost, if there were to be a proposed development on it, obviously that would require the property to be cleaned, I assume?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, it depends on the eventual use of the property as to what degree you need to remediate it.
Okay, what about for high density residential?
No. That would have to be assessed as a part of a project. And I don't have an answer for you offhand, but it certainly could be part of a report coming back to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I think two things here. Nothing wrong with investigating potential developments on the property. I think that there are really, it could branch off in two ways from there. Either the development could move forward and the city would, or the housing corporation, or both, would be required to clean the property. Or if we cleaned the property, does that make it more marketable? If we're going to clean the property anyways, if we cleaned it, does that make it more marketable to a broader project from the private sector? I think is a question that I would want to see resolved in this report. I don't know if that's captured necessarily in here, but it kind of inherently is.
Yeah, it isn't explicitly, but look, the reality is, and this is a bit of a challenge with nailing that down, the degree that you would have to remediate the property really depends on how you're going to use the property. If there's a large part of the property has a parking lot on it, that has a different remediation level than if you're going to turn a large part of the property into a park, right? So frankly, the concern about environmental contamination is sincere, but the reality of this community and the reality of where we're sitting right now is a lot of this land, from the steel plant to where we're sitting to the Suncor site, was industrial and heavy industrial use and had contaminants. So, a lot of it, as you're aware, City Hall being a spot, was developed upon. So I personally don't believe that the contamination there is an actual, it might be a minor term, but I don't think it's fatal to a significant project there. But that is something that they'll be considering as they look at the development. And whenever any information that's gleaned might be helpful to somebody in the future looking to develop there. But frankly, we need development, and we need like high density residential development. I welcome all the money that's come into the community from outside the community. I'm glad to see external funds come into the community and invest in our community. I think that's a positive indicator of confidence in our community. But we need more units. So some, parties could buy the units that are here, but we need there to be more units. And I believe that if we build units, if we get build units online, people will move here and people will come here. And we're not doing it. We're not really getting units online to the degree that we need to get units online to house the people that are looking around for a place to live. And we can continue to wait for other people to do it, or we can push a bit and try and look at doing some of it ourselves. And we don't do much that's outside of our wheelhouse. I frankly don't think with the Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation as a partner that this is outside of our wheelhouse. And often people that own land that's stagnant and nothing's happening with it find a way to make that land useful. And we own land. We own a nice piece that Councillor Dufour has correctly pointed out. We've improved over this council term. We've got access onto Bay Street, which was critical. So I believe that this resolution and moving this forward will have a positive result, even if it isn't the city and the housing corp developing it themselves. It could end up in a private public sector development. It could end up with multiple partners. But actually doing the work of trying to develop that piece of property, I think will bear fruit 2, 3, 4 years down the road. That will help this community out significantly, and that's why I'm trying to move it forward now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I guess the answer to whether or not this development or another one will bear fruit is what's the cost to clean it up and who's going to bear that cost. So if some benchmark, based on use could be provided in the report to the greatest degree possible. I realize that there's some factors that are at play there. I think it'll go a long way to help us determine what we want to do with it, or help market the property if we decided we want to put it out more broadly.
I agree.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this? All in favor? Motion is carried here to me unanimously.
That will bring us to item 8.6, Indigenous specific housing. I have a motion by councillors Dufour and Hilsinger. Whereas the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board has made substantial investments in our homelessness prevention, shelter system, and transition housing over the last 2 years. And whereas the reactive costs of chronic homelessness, poor mental health, and the opioid epidemic continue to be borne by our neighborhoods, community members, and property tax base. And whereas Indigenous people represent a disproportionately high percentage of people experiencing homelessness, as evidenced by the most recent point in time count coordinated by the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board and community partners, 65% of the homeless population in Sault Ste. Marie identify as Indigenous. And whereas the Indian Friendship Center in Sault Ste. Marie and Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services have developed a proposal for an Indigenous supportive housing initiative. And whereas the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board has been meeting with the Indian Friendship Center and Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services on its proposal and on the potential of the parties working jointly on a supportive housing initiative that serves and supports our Indigenous homeless population. And whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie supports in principle for Indigenous by Indigenous as the best model for Indigenous specific supportive housing within the City of Sault Ste. Marie, whereby the Indigenous community has the appropriate knowledge and access to cultural supports to help successfully navigate Indigenous people on their journey to long-term tenancies. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Sault Ste. Marie City Council express support in principle of the initiatives and efforts of the Indian Friendship Center in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, and the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board, working in partnership to develop supportive Indigenous specific housing in our community. Further, be it resolved that Sault Ste. Marie City Council also express support in principle for the use of municipal dollars through the District of Sault Ste. Marie Social Services Administration Board to proactively invest in establishing housing with the necessary supports for the chronically homeless members of Sault Ste. Marie homeless community in conjunction with the supportive efforts of Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services and the Indian Friendship Centre in Sault Ste. Marie, and that Mayor Provenzano be directed to call upon our provincial and federal governments to provide annualized funding for the establishment and operation of supporting housing for all members of our community.
Council, I'm going to speak to this one too, because I'm one of the authors of it. And I say one of the authors of it because I've been working on this with Councillor Dufour, but also Paul Gouge at the Indigenous Friendship Centre, Carolyn Hepburn from Sioux College, and Justin Marchand from the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Authority. We need supportive housing in our community. That's clear. We all agree with that. And, you know, we have to face the reality, and we have to acknowledge that a disconcerting percentage of the homeless people in our community or impermanently home people in our community are Indigenous. And I think a natural response to this would be we need supportive housing for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike, and that's true. We do. But we certainly need significant supportive housing for our Indigenous community. And we have a group here who is leading that, who reached out to work with the DSAB on that, who's reached out to work with the city through my office on that. And I committed to support and work with them. And that's how this resolution got before us today. They have a compelling project they're trying to move forward. I think we should support it because it's important, because people need support, and because the reality is that we have a significant challenge in our community, and our Indigenous population needs much more support than it's receiving, specifically our Indigenous homeless population. So we developed this resolution collaboratively. Councillor Dufour agreed to move it forward. I have met with the stakeholders that are involved in the project. I thank them for their work. I have spent time with Councillor Dufour and Mike Nadeau of the DSAB on this. Everybody's on board and trying to move together collaboratively and to try and help the consortium that's trying to move this project forward, move it forward. And I put that motion forward in that spirit. I hope council sees fit to support it and express support to our Indigenous community through it. Councillor Dufour, did you want to add anything?
Mayor Provenzano, when it comes to supportive housing in Sault Ste. Marie, we are sorely lacking in these units. I believe we only have about 10 of them that are funded through the LIN. You know, these units provide the kind of healthcare support that enables folks who are sick to successfully be able to reintegrated back in normal housing tenancies. We know we are tremendously under-resourced, especially compared to any other communities with this service. And we have a really unique opportunity here to join in partnership with some great Indigenous organizations in Sault Ste. Marie to be able to offer more and to be able to do more. Speaking as the councillor for this is probably the #1 issue that I have my constituents communicating to me. And on a very regular basis, I'm hearing from folks on the street that they do support us finding solutions to this problem, even if it does mean using municipal dollars for something that has typically been a provincial responsibility. So I think that by working in partnership with our Indigenous partners here, hopefully we're able to both do the responsible thing for the city taxpayer in leveraging funding, but also to do the right and moral thing to have for Indigenous by Indigenous led housing for our Indigenous citizens here in Sault Ste. Marie. So I hope that council continues to support this project. I know that I've appreciated being a part of this process, and I thank Mayor Provenzano for his leadership here as well.
Councillor Hilsinger, did you want to add anything as the seconder of this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Dufour, for championing this very, very important partnership opportunity. Thank you.
Council, do you have any questions for either me or Councillor Dufour on this? All in favor? Motion is carried.
That brings us to 8.7, snow windrow clearing. I have a motion by Councilors Gardy and Hilsinger. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie's winter climate consists not only of significant snow accumulation, yet also thawing events. And whereas there are different points throughout the winter due to heavy snowfall events or significant thawing, that snow or ice windrows at the end of residential driveways can be much more substantial and more burdensome than usual after roads are cleared by public work plows. And whereas the community of Sault Ste. Marie has an older than average population than found in communities across Ontario, and many of our senior population reside in houses across the community. And whereas there are also many residents with different physical disabilities or health conditions who are unable to clear larger than normal snow windrows. And whereas there are limited other options for both the elderly and those with physical disabilities to reside due to lack of appropriate housing for both groups and a shortage of housing generally. Now therefore be it resolved that city staff be requested to explore potential options and report back with associated costs of developing a program that those 65 years of age and older and with people with physical disabilities and or medical conditions could opt into at a nominal cost, assist with the clearing of heavier, larger than usual snow windrows. Further, be it resolved that this report ascribe an amount of snowfall that would have to fall over a specific 12 to 24-hour period and what type of thawing or snow clearing and or other factors would initiate the clearing of windrows. Also, that it include a time frame within which these residents could reasonably expect the clearing of their windrow to occur.
Councilor Gardy, it's your motion.
Mayor, I appreciate it. So I consulted Mayor Provenzano prior to writing this, and his advice, and I understand why, was to not be as precise as I was with the motion. But to go for something a little bit more broad and general and leave it to staff to come back with something. But quite frankly, I'm of the opinion that something needs to be done on this, and it needs to be done sooner rather than later. And it was brought to my attention, or brought to our attention earlier in the day or yesterday, that something came up in a previous council, some recommendations as to the cost, and it never went anywhere. I think it needs to get done. We often say that we want seniors to stay in their homes and that it's the best place for them. We lack housing, as illustrated by Mr. Dufour and the mayor's several housing motions today. And in order for some older residents and those with physical disabilities and medical conditions to live in their homes, one of the challenges they're faced with is the snow removal. And much of it can be done by them when, it's an average snowfall. But when we have one of our extreme weather events, or when roads are scraped in anticipation of a thaw, or after a thaw, we all know that some driveways are left with extremely large and heavy windrows. We get calls about them all the time. And to be quite frank, with the beginning of my term, I will say that Public Works was much more cooperative in clearing some of these than they've been in the last, say, year and a half. Now, that is my experience. I am not speaking about everyone's. There are other councillors who expressed to me as recently as this evening, that they get the same sort of service that they did years ago. I don't think that's the case myself. I believe that on a few occasions that may happen over the winter, we owe it to these populations more than others to assist with the clearing of the windrows. So quite frankly, I'm asking staff to come up with a program that we could take a look at. I've provided some guidance in the motion, granted, but I trust staff will use their experience, their knowledge, and some examples from other parts of the province and report back to us with a plan. And I'm hoping that that could be done in a way that we could consider it, vote on a plan, and implement it prior to next winter if it's deemed viable, which I'm hopeful it would be. I've heard people say to me, fellow councillors and others in the community, that say, well, you know what, these people can just call a snowplow company and they can come and take care of the end of their driveway. Well, it costs like $50 for somebody to come by if you can find somebody, and a lot of these people can't afford it. So I also know that I would hear back from some colleagues or people in the public saying, we can't afford it. So I thought, maybe offset the cost with a nominal payment by some of these people who could afford it to participate in the program. I know they do it in a couple of communities in Southern Ontario that I noticed, one of them being Oakville. So I leave it at that. I'm hopeful for the support. I was as specific as I was because I felt the need to be. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Any other, who seconded this? Councillor Hilsinger, did you want to speak to it as a seconder?
I fully support Councillor Gardy's intention to finally find a solution for these challenges that that our seniors and others face, and I hope we can gather the supports needed to work on a report that will get us to that goal.
Councillor Christian, then Councillor Shoemaker.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the spirit behind this resolution. I agree with what Councillor Gardy is saying in terms of the need and recognize that, you know, we have an older demographic in Sault Ste. Marie. There are people with disabilities that can use a service like this. And to the points that were raised earlier about the fact that we don't have enough housing, the argument that we need to support these people so that they can maintain their locations is important. But having said all that, I'm struggling with the practicality of it. Having spoken to, and I don't want to prejudice staff in any way, but from an administrative standpoint, I'm fearful that what's going to come back is that it's going to be too hard to maintain, manage, collection of fees. We're really adding to the workload if we approved at some point a program like this. My hope would be that there will be a cost to the city, and I'm wondering if it's worth going through the process of providing a report. But I think one of the goals has to be, or one of the options has to be, taking the amount of money that it would cost to run a program like this and perhaps subsidizing some of the programs that already exist in the city to provide this service. It is a report, so I tend to support resolutions that ask for a report, but I think this is a very slippery slope. And unless staff comes back with something very unique that can be implemented and can clearly identify and articulate who qualifies and doesn't qualify. I appreciate Councillor Gardy saying 65, but you know, outside of that being a traditional retirement age, that's an arbitrary number. I don't know how you determine who qualifies. I want to support the idea of a report, but I have very grave doubts that we're going to get something back. And I really think it requires that we support by way of funding other programs that exist, recognizing the need out there.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with Councillor Christian. I do think that first off, the resolution is far too prescriptive. And I know that Councillor Gardy said he had thought about that and went with this despite the recommendation not to go with something so prescriptive. We have a policy at PW, and the policy is if the windrow is 2 feet high by 2 feet wide, they'll come and clear it. There is often difficulty doing that in a timely way, because usually when it's snowing or when they're doing these, when these windrows are created, it's because there's lots of snow falling and the folks continue to be out plowing the streets. That's not a reason not to have the policy. That's a reason to use what we currently have and better implement it. So maybe the policy needs to be that it's 1.5 feet or 1 foot by 1 foot rather than 2 by 2. Asking for this report doesn't allow us to consider any of those options, including funding existing services. So more generally, I think that we can find ways to help people stay in their homes by ensuring that they aren't trapped in their driveway. I don't think this report gets us there. Seeking this report gets us there because it is so specific on what it's asking for. I would support something much broader, asking staff to come back with an option or various options on how we could improve snow clearing services for the community. But I can't bring myself to support this particularly.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Gardy and Hilsinger for bringing this forward. But I think we are going at a different route. Are we in business in removing snow for a cost to our seniors, even though it's a nominal fee, which we don't know what that fee will be? I think there's too many negatives. For instance, if city staff goes on to people's driveways, they do damage, they're responsible, they have to pay. I can see one alternative, and Councillor Christian brought that forward, and I've used it, is using Red Cross. So if we can supplement some type of funding to Red Cross, they can take care of it. But I think if we start doing this as a partial business, and then now we're competing with other contractors that are out there. And I did call several city workers, and one of their, they've had several concerns about this, but manpower is a major issue. If they scrape a ward, we'll say, how many pieces of machinery do you need to go out and clean people's driveways that are, we'll say, 65 and over? So I won't support this because I think we're just giving our staff more work to come back with a report. I believe that when budget time comes, we can maybe allocate some money to some of these organizations that provide the service. And I think it would be a lot easier to manage than have our city staff. Public Works will receive hundreds of calls every day. And some people will call 2, 3, 4 times in the same day because there's too much snow. But I think the big issue is the ice. I think if staff comes up with a system to avoid the big chunks of ice that they place in people's driveways. I noticed watching them scrape the roads last week, the blades right now, they have these V cuts in the blades, and that causes crystals, smaller crystals, and there's no boulders when they're scraping the street, which is a positive. But I think the major issue is the heavy chunks of ice when they're scraping the streets. When there is snowfall, I haven't received any calls that the city put too much snow at the end of the driveway. Most of the calls that they have concerns is the ice buildup at the end of the driveway. They're breaking shear pins on their snow blowers. They're older. It's a lot of work. So I appreciate this resolution, but I will be voting against it. Thanks.
Councillor, I have Councillor Nero next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to thank Councillor Gardy for bringing this forward, but I do also have a concern with the nominal cost that the motion speaks to. The concern is basically the logistics of running such a program. But, other than that, I think we need to realize at the end of the day, if we want to solve this issue, it's up to this council to do it, subsequent council or whatever. We received a report on February the 20th, 2018 on removal of driveway windrows. Staff go right into the details of what it would cost. Council of the day at the time on February 20th, we didn't do anything with this report. But we were told that it would take between 343,000 and over 1 million, assuming 8 weeks of driveway clearing per winter season. So it's not going to be a lot of work for staff to bring this report back. It's here already. They just have to update the numbers. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we have to decide if we want to up the budget and include this work, because I don't think we can really expect Public Works to do it haphazardly. We remove some windrows, we don't do the other ones. We're either going to do them all or we continue on what we're doing today. But I don't have a problem looking at some other options that could be brought forward. But I just have a feeling that at the end of the day, that's where. Thank you.
Councillor Venezuela.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to I just want to address a couple of things. I'm really thankful that Councillor Guardian Hilsinger brought this resolution here. I receive a lot of calls. In Ward 2, we have a lot of seniors in their homes. I don't know that it addresses the situation, but we need to have some sort of plan in dealing with this situation. Red Cross stopped doing the services back in 2021. So they're not doing the home assistance programs anymore, which included the house cleaning and the snow shoveling. DSAB, I think, has taken up some of that. So, you know, I really want to support this resolution, but I think there are some gaps in there that we're not addressing. And I agree with my colleague, Councillor Nero, that, you know, we either need to invest so that everyone gets services or not. But I certainly, in looking at, you know, 65 and over, people with disabilities, that's also a very difficult program to administer in terms of, you know, how do you determine what disability? How do you determine criteria? So I think this is something that either we do as part of Public Works, or we look at another community organization that could administer that type of programming, similar to what the Red Cross did on a voluntary basis. So I really appreciate what Corey and Donna did, because it is an issue. It's an issue for me. I'm 54 years old, and when I can't dig myself out, I have a bad back. So, you know, it's not just 65-year-olds. So it is an issue, and we want people to stay in their homes, and I want that too. But I think we need to go about it in a different way, and I don't know that the resolution captures all of that. Thank you.
So just hold on, Councilor Gardy. And before I come back to you to reply to some of the comments, I want to check and see if our friends on the virtually here have any comments. I have some of my own, and then we'll deal with the matter. Councilor, so I'll start with Councilor Dufour, then I'll go to Councilor Hilsinger.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to echo what was shared by Councillors Venezuela and Councillor Nero. You know, I went over the report that Councillor Nero refers to, you know, and 3 years ago, it was projected to cost, you know, up to $1 million in operating and up to $1 million in capital to perform the service. You know, and collectively as a council, we saw fit to, I believe, reduce the winter control budget at our last budget cycle, you know, with the reserve amount that was being held back. So I just, I guess I'm struggling and kind of questioning how likely it is that we would see fit to then not only put that money back, but then increase it by up to 2 to 4-fold. I certainly acknowledge that the windrows on private property are inconvenient. They are a barrier to many elderly folks. I speak with many of them on the phone. The reality is that you know, I believe our city offers a very good level of snow removal service. We spend a lot of money on it. We spend more than any of our comparator communities, and I do think that in spite of the issue with the windrows, that it is a good level of service that we offer. Thanks.
Okay, Councilor Hilsinger.
Good discussion. Good discussion. I'm wondering if we could think about this in a way that is not a burden to us, but that's an opportunity for our community. So I'll just throw this into the conversation. This is a comment. Instead of that, you know, how this is going to tax us or burden us, or, you know, how are we going to figure out how to do this? How about if we think about how we could better serve our residents, and on top of that, make a winter community that more people would want to live in because they receive exemplary services and help. And I don't know what the answer is. I think it's the spirit, I think, here of what Councillor Gardy is looking to have happen, and others we can see. You're all hoping for it to be different and to be better. And I think if perhaps the thinking behind it is by ourselves and our staff is that we look at how we can, as I said, create the opportunity out of it, better serve our residents, and be a winter community or a 4-season community that people want to live in, because we're doing great things to help them manage those seasonal issues. Thanks.
Okay, so I see Councillor Scott's put his hand up, so I'll go to him.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to more or less echo what Councillors Shoemaker, Councillor Christian have said about it. That's kind of my feelings on it as well. I think to where I live, and I know this is going to be exclusive just to my spot, but I ran into a public works staff member the other day when I was just out walking my dog, and he mentioned they're having enough trouble as it is keeping up with certain things in the manpower this time of year just to clean the ditches out. And I can imagine the amount of snow that I get even just down my road. Everyone on this area is getting more than that 2 foot by 2 foot on just a heavy snow day when they come by with the snow. I'm sure there's other areas in the city. So I do hear the feedback that when it gets to be those ice chunks, especially in some of the older neighborhoods in the West End. So I can appreciate where Councillor Gardy is coming from in that sense. But it's a tough one. It is a slippery slope. I can also see wanting to provide the service to everyone in some way, but Councillor Dufour's spot on. It's hard to have to put that money back into public works after we've already taken out even less, but put more back in. So I think currently as it stands, I mean, winter services here are in my experience, pretty good. I would have no complaints. Then again, I'm relatively healthy. I can take care of the end of my driveway, so I don't necessarily have that perspective on it. But I think for those reasons, I'm not necessarily going to be in support tonight. But there may be something we can revisit in the future, perhaps in a way that's a little bit more fiscally sound, or maybe a collaboration or something that we can do for some of these people. But that's everything I have.
Okay, Councillor Gardy, a lot's been said here that I think you want to reply to, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that, but I'll just offer my comments to council. Councillor Gardy had indicated I told him he was like too prescriptive and the motion should be much more general. And I did that because I thought down the road on this a bit myself. And you know, I didn't see staff being able to come back with a report that would be supported by council in this prescription, because it's pretty narrow, and I think it would be expensive to administer. And I think it would be, I'm not saying expensive to actually go out and do, just expensive to administer the program. And then you have to go out and like realize in the program and actually get the staff on the road cleaning up the windrows, and you know, our public works staff is stretched in the winter. We did an audit of our services, and one of the few areas that we're providing above average service is in snow clearing. And I do think the guys up at Public Works, team up at Public Works, I should say, does a good job in that respect. But Councillor Bruni made one comment that I've come back to myself a number of times. I don't necessarily believe that the windrows that are created on a normal snow clearing are the problem. What's really the problem is the windrows that are created when we scrape the roads down. And where I saw this going potentially, and why I was encouraging Councillor Gardy to be much more general, is I thought staff would look at, you know, different levels of potential service and the cost of those. And the one that I would be preoccupied with is there an opportunity here to, independent of the windrow policy, maybe changing the windrow policy, where we say, when we scrape the road down and we put all that ice at the end of your driveway, we'll push it away. And that wouldn't be something that we do frequently. It would be something that we do only when we go out and scrape the road. But staff have to look at that, because they don't know how many times in a year they're going to have to go out and scrape the road, but they can look at how many times a year in the last 10 years they had to go out and scrape the road, and they can do some math on that. Because when we go out to scrape the road, we create a mess. And we create windrows that are hard for people to move, frankly, independent of age. And I think a program that is much easier to administer is a program that says, when we create really these difficult ice windrows, we'll move them, regardless of whether you're 65 or 55. So, you know, I wasn't pushing Councillor Gardy to ask for that or go in that direction. I just thought a more general resolution might lead staff to say, these are the different things you can do, and these are the different costs for the things you can do. And I think one of the options they would consider is that option of just, when we scrape down, we clean everybody's windrow. And that's when we clean windrows, and otherwise we don't clean windrows. And we would then have that discussion. Independent of my advice to him, this is the way the motion came in. And when I read it, I decided I was still going to support it because independent of his prescriptive nature, the prescriptive nature of this motion, not his, but the prescriptive nature of this motion, it doesn't stop staff from making its best recommendations in the context of the motion, because it does say bring back options. So I still think staff has the opportunity to do that. I think there is a very legitimate issue here with the big ice windrows that we create, that people struggle with. And we all get the emails and phone calls about people being stuck in their homes when they have a doctor's appointment. So I think there's something worth looking at, but we should all be cognizant of the fact that this will be in addition to the levy. Like there's no way to find this inside the current public works budget, because I think it would require more staffing. And will require staffing that we can kind of get on the road while we're doing that work. So you know, it is something that many people in our community are dealing with. I said it earlier, we have an above average age in our community. We have more seniors here than many other places. And we do want seniors to live in dignity in their homes. And we don't have the same services, private sector services available or public sector services available to get people out to clean the end of your driveway. So, you know, for those people that can't afford that and want to do it, it's great. You have someone coming to do that for you, and a lot of people will opt into that. There's a group of people that can't. So with that said, Councillor Gardy, I'm going to support your motion, and I'll wait till staff returns the report. We can have a discussion on it then, what the best path forward is. There were a lot of comments made that were in response to your comments, so I will give you a couple minutes to reply to those, and then we'll have a vote.
Turn on. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate everybody's taking the time to articulate their thoughts on the issue, let alone the motion. Part of what I wanted to do was to generate some significant discussion about it, so we would be kind of thoughtful and reflective as to how this service is provided in our community. I will say again that I think we can improve upon it. I think the motion itself states pretty explicitly that on the few occasions when this needs to get done, is that's what I was talking about, not on an ongoing basis all winter. I think we need to consider all of the talk about housing and the shortage of it. I think we also have to consider how our climate is changing, and we may very well have to scrape our streets a lot more than we did 15, 20 years ago. So I don't think a practice from decades ago is sufficient today, potentially, and moving forward. And I'll also say that, you know, I appreciate everybody talking about it. I don't know what the conversation was like when this was brought back in 2018. I'm hoping it wasn't as fulsome because nothing materialized and the situation remains the same. So I'm hopeful that I get the support, or we get the support that we need to send it to the staff, and they come back with options. I'd reiterate that there are communities who do administer and manage a program such as this. And I can direct staff to those if they want my assistance in that. But if this fails this evening, by the next meeting, Councillor Hilsinger and I will come back with another motion, if need be, I guess, and delay things by a month. Speaking, I shouldn't use the word specifically because that's gotten me into some trouble, but a more general motion for staff to consider and come back simply with some options to improve upon the current situation. So, but I really appreciate everybody taking the time tonight. Thanks.
Probably run into a reconsideration there, Councillor Gardy, if this fails. Councillor Christian.
Councillor Gardy, again, I appreciate what he's trying to do. His is very prescriptive, very specific. You're suggesting that the report should include potentially doing everybody's driveway when we're dealing with ice issues. But to me, those are two different considerations. He's very specific.
I'm not considering that at all. That's just my perspective. he mentioned that.
No, that's, I'm saying that the mayor is suggesting that as part of the report, it may come back saying that we need to deal with the ice issue. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying we need to deal with the ice issue for everyone. It's not specific to the 65. I'm getting a mixed signal here.
So no, what I was trying to articulate there is I had discouraged him from bringing a resolution this prescriptive.
Right.
Because I thought it should be sent to staff and staff would come back with a number of options. I thought that's one of the options staff would come back with.
Right.
I still believe staff will come back with options because staff is going to look at this and it could just write a singular report really quick. It gets the numbers, get it back to us and just write in Councillor Gardy's parameters here. But I think that will fail when it gets back to us. So I think in his language, he says to develop options and come back to us. I think staff will naturally put options in front of us. If we want to do this windrow removing process, here is the things how you could approach it.
Would it require a friendly amendment to be specific that when the report is written, it comes back with the possibility of providing ice removal for scraping as you described it? Because the resolution doesn't say that. It just says 65. What's that? In my mind, they're two different things. And then I
Councillor Gardy
encourage,
says,
if it fails, I encourage him to.
He's going to come back next month with another one.
Yeah, to me, they're two different things.
Yeah, so listen, for 7 years, we haven't talked over each other or talked when other people were talking. So Councillor Gardy's created that habit. So I'd appreciate if we would not speak while someone else is speaking. We kind of land the plane on this. So yeah, if you're uncomfortable with the motion because you don't think it conceptualizes that, you vote against it. I was still going to support it because I think in the natural course of it, the staff would present us with options, but it might not. And it's asking for a report. And as all of you recognize, for my entire mayoralty, I've always tried to support each of you when you wanted to report back so we could have a more fulsome discussion about something. It's very unlikely I would support Councillor Gardy's initiative here if it came back in the four corners of what he's asked for, because the cost of it will be tremendous and you'll be adding something to the levy in an area where we're already spending, we're already providing a higher level of service than other communities. But I'm not going to kill a report just for the sake of the fact that I might not support it in the end.
So if I may, in the spirit of what we've talked about in the past, when we've articulated our feelings, I'm assuming that the CAO understands exactly what those of us who may vote against this may hope for if it passes, that you would include costing for doing ice removal of windrows for all constituents. Since we've discussed it, and that seems to be, that's what you've articulated.
Yeah, we could ask the CEO for his perspective on that.
Do you do, Mr. Mayor and members of council, in looking at the resolution and hearing your discussion, I'm fixated on the phrase explore potential options.
Okay.
That was the phrase I was fixing.
Okay.
I told him to delete that last paragraph. I told him to do a bunch of things, but he didn't listen to me on any of them. So we have this in front of us, but because it says explore potential options, I thought there was enough room there to do something. Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this would require an amendment to the motion, but I'm going to throw it out there. It would be helpful, I believe, if we got this report, when we get this report back, if staff lets us know how we got here today. Because I believe in the past, we used to remove windrows from the ice scraping.
In the past, you used to do what I suggested we might look at again.
Right, but I don't recall that we cut that out of the budget. That's why I would like to hear how we got to today.
Sure, but I think one of the things that happened is we might not have increased the budget to the degree it needed to be increased to accommodate the costs of snow removal. So some services that we used to do naturally fell away.
Right, but is that why we realized that we were able to not use the entire budget as we did last budget meeting? We held back and
I don't
to
think
say it, we said we didn't cut services. that money was there if we needed it in reserve.
That's right. But I don't know, maybe we'll get some feedback on when we remove those ice windrows, because I don't know that we've been doing, I haven't seen that happen in a number of years.
That's right. It's been a number of
It's
years.
been a number of
but I
years.
don't recall ever council of the day ever saying, you know, we're cutting our budget and we're going to realize that money by not removing the scraping down of those roads when we have windrow. And so I think it would be helpful how we got to where we are today. If we're not doing it. I know we went to the 2-foot rule and we included all snow in the driveways, because that 2-foot policy is for snow as well.
Yeah, it is.
Right? So, but going back, I think that when we scraped the roads down, we used to remove that.
I'm advised that you did. That was prior to my time. here.
Right, and I'd like to maybe in this report to remind me when that changed. And I don't know if we need that, or again, if the CAO's got it.
No, okay, we're calling the vote on this. Councilor Gardy, I've heard from you too many times tonight. So we have the motion here. The motion's been read.
Yes.
All in favor? So we've got Councilor Gardy, Councilor Vezo-Allen, Councilor Nero, myself, Councilor Christian, and Councilor Hilsinger. That's 6. Opposed? Councilor Bruni, Councilor Shoemaker, Councilor Christian, and Councilor Dufour. So 6-4 passes thanks to Councilor Christian's benevolence.
So there's a couple of votes. Councillor Christian, you were in favor? Okay. Okay. So I had Councillor Dufour, Councillor Shoemaker, Councillor Bruni, and Councillor Scott opposed. And that will bring us to bylaws. Under agenda item 11, consideration and passing of bylaws, a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date March 21st, 2022 be approved, save and accept bylaws 2022-45 and 2022-47.
All in favor? Carried.
And under agenda item 14, I have a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Christian resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Carried. Okay, council, I will see you in closed.